Hey there, fellow deep divers. Ready to hear some pretty incredible stories today?
I think so, yeah.
They're about faith and resilience, the kind that makes you wonder how people get through the toughest situations. You know?
It's really something else when you see how people find strength when things are at their worst.
Exactly. So we're diving deep into Emily Compagno's book, Under His Wings, How Faith on the Front Lines Has Protected American Troops.
This book isn't just like battles and dates, it's really personal.
Yeah, it's about American troops from way back in World War II to, like, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And what's so interesting is that Compagno looks at how their faith, their beliefs, help them to not only survive, but to thrive, even.
Yeah, in situations most of us can't even fathom.
Right, and the best part is we get to hear directly from the soldiers, their families, even a Gold Star mother.
It's raw and real. You really feel it.
So to do this deep dive right, we're going chapter by chapter.
Yeah, good idea.
Each chapter focuses on a different person or group. It's like getting a whole bunch of mini biographies.
All about faith, huh?
Faith under fire, that's for sure.
I'm ready. Let's jump in.
Okay. Part 1 focuses on the global war on terror. And the first chapter, Family for a Night and Always, starts with a story you might not expect.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's about Colonel Tim Karcher, a commander in Iraq, and 5 NFL cheerleaders.
Cheerleaders, huh?
Can you imagine being in a war zone and suddenly having to host cheerleaders?
Talk about a change of pace.
Right.
What happened?
Well, they were on a tour to boost morale, but something came up and they got stranded in Sadr City, which was really dangerous back then.
Oh, wow.
And get this, Emily Compagno was one of those cheerleaders.
Away.
Yeah, so she's writing from her own experience, which makes it even more interesting.
That's really cool. So she was there.
She was right there in the thick of it.
So what happens?
The chapter describes their visit, how they brought some joy to the soldiers.
I bet.
And these really strong bonds formed between them, even in that intense environment.
Makes sense. I guess when you're going through something like that together, you connect in a different way.
Totally. One detail I remember is Colonel Karcher trying to prepare for them, like finding decent places for them to stay and worrying about their safety.
All while in a war zone.
Exactly. It's kind of funny and heartwarming at the same time.
So everything turned out okay?
Well, not quite. Just a few days after they left, tragedy struck.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It really shows how fragile life is, especially over there, and how strong those bonds you make in those situations can be.
Heavy stuff.
It is, but it's a good reminder that even in the darkest places, joy and camaraderie can shine through.
For sure. Okay. Chapter 2. God Speaks.
Now things get intense. This is about Army Ranger Jeff Struecker during the Battle of Mogadishu, the one from Black Hawk Down.
Oh, wow. I remember that movie.
It's a heavy chapter. Lots of fighting, losing friends, chaos, and violence,
Hard to imagine going through that.
Right. And Struecker is honest about how hard it was to deal with what he saw, especially with his faith.
So how did he cope?
What's amazing is that even with all that going on, he found peace.
Really? In the middle of all that?
Yeah, and it wasn't naive. It was like he completely surrendered to something bigger than himself.
Like he accepted that he wasn't in control.
Exactly. It wasn't about ignoring fear, but finding strength beyond himself.
I can see how that would be helpful in that kind of situation.
And you know what's really interesting? His calmness in all the chaos actually affected his squad.
Really?
Yeah. Some guys who weren't even religious started asking him about his faith, how he stayed so steady.
Wow. So his faith was like an example for them.
It really was. It wasn't about preaching, but just how he lived it.
That's powerful stuff.
It is. And there's more to Struecker's story. After Mogadishu, he felt called to ministry.
So he left the military to do that?
Yeah, he wanted to help other soldiers, process their experiences and find their own path.
Like his way of giving back?
Exactly.
That's amazing.
All right, chapter 3. Today is a good day to die. This is Sergeant First Class Jeremiah Wilbur, a Green Beret in Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Okay, what's his story about?
It's about courage, facing constant danger.
That takes a lot of strength.
It does. And what's unique about Wilbur is how he used to deal with fear as a kid.
How so?
He had this phrase, he'd repeat it when he was scared.
Like a mantra.
Exactly.
What is it?
Today is a good day to die.
Wow. That's pretty intense for a kid.
I know, right? But as he got older and his faith grew, especially in the military, that phrase changed.
It did.
It became, Jesus is always with me.
That's a big shift.
It shows how faith changes and grows, especially when you're going through tough stuff.
It's not just something you have, it's something you develop.
Right. And another thing about Wilbur's story is his mom.
What about her?
She was a big influence on his faith.
Oh, yeah.
There's this part where he remembers something she used to say about inner light, and it suddenly clicked for him.
Like he finally understood what she meant,
Exactly. It makes you think about how faith gets passed down.
and how tough times can bring out its true meaning.
Okay, moving on to chapter 4. The spirit of joy.
This sounds a bit more upbeat.
It is, in a way. This is Chaplain Anthony Randall, and his story shows how joy can exist even when things are rough.
So he was a chaplain in Iraq.
Actually, he had a whole career in engineering before that.
Really?
Yeah, and then he felt pulled back to the military, but as a chaplain this time?
Interesting. So he wasn't always in that role?
Nope. And at first, he didn't want to go back, you know?
Makes sense. He had a good life.
Right. But something kept drawing him back, and when he finally went, it was powerful.
So what's the takeaway from his story?
That sometimes finding your purpose means doing something totally different, something you never expected.
Like taking a leap of faith.
Exactly. And the chapter also talks about how chaplains work, especially in a war zone.
It's more than just preaching, right?
Oh, yeah. It's about taking care of the whole person spiritually, emotionally, even physically.
Like a holistic approach.
Exactly, because everything's connected.
All right. Chapter 5. Eyes in the Sky.
This one takes us to the Navy pilots, Chris and Angie Baker.
A husband and wife team.
That's right. And their story is all about the power of prayer.
Especially in high-pressure situations.
Exactly, like flying fighter jets. Both Chris and Angie are top-notch pilots, and their faith is a big part of their lives.
So how does their faith play out in their work?
Chris talks about this intense training exercise called SERI training. It stands for survival, evasion, resistance, and escape.
Sounds intense.
It is. They put you through the ringer, physically and mentally.
To prepare for the worst, huh?
Yeah, like being captured. And during this training, Chris is being interrogated, and the guy's mocking his faith.
That's messed up.
It is. But even with all that, Chris kept praying.
And it helped.
He says it gave him peace and strength when he needed it most.
That's like prayer was his weapon.
In a way, yeah. And the chapter also reminds us to think about all the people who serve, not just the ones on the front lines.
Yeah, there are so many people behind the scenes making it all happen.
And they all deserve our respect and our prayers.
So it's not just about faith in combat, it's about faith in service. All right, chapter 6, God will not abandon you.
This one is about Army medic Jessica Lynch.
And what's her story about?
It's about finding courage when you're responsible for other people's lives.
That's a lot of pressure.
Being a medic is tough. You're dealing with trauma all the time, life or death situations.
Can't imagine what that's like.
And Lynch is honest about being scared, having doubts.
So how does she deal with that?
She talks about this moment before her deployment. She's in the bathroom crying and praying for strength.
Wow, that's raw.
It is, but it shows that even the bravest people get scared, and it's okay to admit that.
Yeah, we're all human.
Right. And the chapter also talks about teamwork, how important it is in combat.
Like you have to trust the people around you.
Exactly. Lynch relied on her fellow soldiers to do their jobs, to have her back.
It's all about that shared responsibility.
All right, last chapter for this part, chapter 7, Ministering to the Minister.
This one focuses on the chaplains.
Yeah, specifically Chaplain Doug Collins.
What's his story about?
It's about the unique pressures chaplains face.
Like what?
They often deal with their own trauma while trying to support everyone else.
That's gotta be tough.
It is. There's this story about a chaplain struggling with PTSD.
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right. And it shows that war affects everyone, even those who are supposed to be helping others.
That's a good reminder that everyone needs support sometimes.
Exactly. And the chapter ends by saying that a chaplain's role isn't about having all the answers or fixing everything.
So what is it about?
It's about being there, listening, creating a space for soldiers to connect with their faith and find strength.
That's powerful stuff.
It is. Okay, so now we're moving into part 2 of the book.
Sounds good.
This is where we go back in time a bit, past the War on Terror.
Okay, further back.
Yeah, to conflicts like Vietnam and Korea.
It's easy to forget about those with everything that's been going on lately.
Right, but these stories are important. They show us how faith and survival have played out in different wars.
I'm interested to see how they're different.
Let's dive into chapter 8.
Keep the faith, baby.
It's about Captain Charlie Plum, a Navy pilot who was a POW in Vietnam.
POW, so prisoner of war.
Yep, for 6 years.
6 years, wow.
It's an incredible story. It shows how strong faith can be, even in the worst conditions.
I bet.
Plum doesn't hide anything. He talks about the terrible things he went through, the isolation.
That must have been really hard.
But he never gave up hope. That's what's amazing.
So what helped him through that?
Well, one thing was this secret communication system the POWs developed.
Really? What was it like?
They'd tap on walls, use code words, all while being watched by the guards.
That's so clever and risky.
It was, but they needed to stay connected.
I can understand that.
And Plum also talks about prayer, knowing that people back home were praying for him.
Even people he didn't know.
Exactly. Gave him strength, knowing he wasn't forgotten.
Makes you realize the power of those connections.
It does. Okay, on to Chapter 9, God's Hand.
This one sounds more spiritual.
It is, in a way. It's about Sergeant Major Daryl Enfinger in Vietnam.
Okay, what was his experience like?
This chapter is really honest about how war can affect faith.
In a good way or a bad way?
Well, Enfinger talks about seeing horrible things, losing friends, and how it made him question everything.
Even his belief in God.
Yeah, he went through a period of real doubt.
I can see how that would happen.
It shows that faith isn't always easy, it can be shaken.
Makes sense.
And Enfinger noticed something interesting among his fellow soldiers.
What was that?
The longer they were in Vietnam, the more they turned to faith.
Really? Why do you think that is?
Maybe being constantly exposed to death and danger makes people search for something bigger than themselves.
Like they need something to hold on to.
That could be it. Okay, Chapter 10, Winning.
This one sounds more positive.
It is, in a way. This is about Colonel Tom Moe, another POW in Vietnam.
Okay, what's his story?
He was a prisoner for 5 years, and his story is about finding comfort in faith, even when things were awful.
I bet that was hard.
It was, but Moe found strength through prayer and his connection with other POWs.
I can see how that would help.
There's this one detail. They managed to have a Christmas celebration in the camp.
Really? How did they do that?
They had a smuggled Bible, toilet paper decorations, even a candle made from a cigarette.
Wow, they really made the best of it.
They did. It shows the human spirit, that need for hope.
So inspiring.
It is. And Moe's story also talks about communion.
You mean the religious ceremony?
Yeah. Even though the POWs came from different faiths, they came together for communion.
That's powerful, like faith united them.
Exactly. And the chapter ends with Moe finally going home.
After 5 years.
It's a testament to hope and the long road to healing.
On to Chapter 11. All the days ordained for me.
This one's set during the Korean War.
Okay, new setting.
Yeah. It's about Corporal Howard Spurlock and Master Sergeant Robert Burr.
What are their stories like?
They both show how faith brings comfort and connection during war.
Makes sense, you need that support.
Spurlock talks about feeling grateful for surviving and how his faith grew through his experiences.
Like he found a deeper meaning.
He even quotes a psalm about how God planned out his days before he was even born.
Wow, that's pretty profound.
It is. And Burr's story is interesting. He carried a Bible with him throughout the war.
Why do you do that?
It gave him comfort, knowing his family back home was reading the same words.
Like a connection to them.
Exactly, and to his faith.
Okay, Chapter 12. The Greatest Generation.
This one takes us back to World War II.
The big one.
It features several stories, all about faith during that time.
There's a lot to cover.
It is, but each story is unique. There's Sergeant Andrew Negra, who fought on D-Day and in the Battle of the Bulge.
He saw a lot of action.
He did, and his faith helped him through it.
What about the other stories?
We hear from Chief Commissary Steward Anton Lorenz, who was at Pearl Harbor during the attack.
Wow, that's a major historical event.
And his daughter remembers it vividly. It shows how war affects everyone, even families back home.
I can imagine.
And then there's Lieutenant Luella Lorenz Cochran, a nurse on the front lines.
That's a tough job.
It is. Her letters home show what it was like for nurses during the war.
So many untold stories.
Right. And together, these World War II stories show how faith gave people strength and resilience in really tough times.
Makes you appreciate their sacrifices.
It does. Okay, moving into the final chapters now, starting with Chapter 13. If it's not good, God's not done.
What's this one about?
This introduces us to Sarah Verardo, whose husband was severely injured in the war.
That's terrible.
It is, but her story is about how her faith helped her through it.
I can see how faith would be important in a situation like that.
It was. Her husband, Mike, was injured by IEDs twice, and Sarah talks about the challenges they face.
Both physically and emotionally, I bet.
Exactly. And their faith helped them to keep going, to find hope.
So it wasn't about finding easy answers.
No, it was about finding strength. I can see that. Sarah has this quote. She says, "The real test of faith is when things are not going well or when you can't make sense of what is happening." And she continues, "At those difficult times, I understand that things will be okay because with God, if it's not good, He's not done."
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. It's about trusting that even when things are tough, there's a bigger plan.
And that things will work out in the end.
Right. Sarah's story is really inspiring.
Okay, on to chapter 14.
This chapter continues Sarah and Mike's story.
So it picks up where the last one left off?
It does, but it focuses on the idea of healing.
Like how faith helps with healing.
Exactly. It talks about how true healing comes from within, from a connection with God.
So it's not about expecting miracles.
No, it's about finding peace in something bigger than yourself.
That makes sense.
There's this moment in the chapter after Mike goes through a tough medical procedure, he says, "I know Jesus."
Just that simple phrase.
It shows how much comfort his faith gives him.
Especially in those vulnerable moments.
Right. And the chapter also talks about how important it is to cope with trauma in healthy ways.
Especially for soldiers coming home from war.
It's about acknowledging the wounds, both physical and emotional, and getting help to heal.
Okay, chapter 15. He was here to share Jesus. This one sounds interesting.
It is. This chapter is about Laura DeRue, a Gold Star mother.
Meaning she lost her son in the war.
Right. And this chapter is about finding purpose even in the face of such a huge loss.
That's got to be incredibly difficult.
It is, but DeRue's faith helped her through it.
So how did she find purpose?
She talks about her son, Gabriel, and how strong his faith was.
And how he touched other people's lives.
Exactly. She says that even though she wishes he was still alive, she finds peace knowing that he shared his faith with so many.
Wow, that's really beautiful.
It is. It shows how faith can help us find meaning, even in tragedy.
And how important it is to remember those who have died.
To honor their lives and what they stood for.
All right, last chapter, chapter 16. Bold in faith.
This one is about Lieutenant Morgan Ortigas.
What's her story about?
Well, it's about her journey as a Jewish woman in the military.
Okay, that's interesting.
And it's also about the moral challenges she faced and how her faith helped her navigate them.
So it's not just about her personal faith.
No, it's about how faith influences our actions in the world.
I see.
The chapter focuses on Ortigas celebrating Hanukkah in Saddam Hussein's former palace.
Wow, that's quite a setting.
It is. And it's not just about different religions coming together, although that's part of it.
So what else is it about?
Ortigas talks about the tough questions she had to ask herself, about right and wrong, about war and peace.
And her faith helped her find answers.
It gave her a framework for making decisions, for acting in a way that aligned with her values.
That's really powerful.
One thing that really struck me about this book is how it tackles the tough questions about faith, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't shy away from the struggles, does it?
Not at all. It would be easy to just show faith as this simple solution to everything.
Right, like a magic wand.
But Compagno shows the doubts, the moments when belief is really tested.
Makes it more real that way.
Definitely. Like in Sergeant Major Enfinger's story, remember how he talked about losing his faith for a while?
Oh yeah, after Vietnam.
It's a powerful admission. It shows that faith isn't always a straight line.
Or like a winding road.
Exactly. But even when people doubt, they're still searching for something to hold on to.
That makes sense, like a basic human need.
And that leads to something that comes up a lot in these last couple chapters. Moral injury.
Moral injury, what's that?
It's like a wound to the soul, you know, when you've seen or done things that go against your values.
I see, like the things that haunt you even after the fighting is over.
Exactly. We see it with Sarah Verardo trying to cope with her husband's injuries.
It's not just about the physical pain.
Right. And it's even more prominent in the last chapter, Bold in Faith, with Lieutenant Morgan Ortigas.
The one celebrating Hanukkah in Saddam Hussein's palace.
That's the one. Her story goes beyond just being Jewish in the military. It's about the ethical dilemmas she faced.
Makes sense. Being in a war zone creates a lot of tough choices.
And her faith helped her work through those to make decisions she could live with.
So it was a guiding principle for her.
You could say that. So as we finish this deep dive, I'm just in awe of these people.
Me too. Their courage and resilience are incredible.
And I'm so grateful they shared their stories. It takes a lot of strength to be that vulnerable.
I agree. This book really shows how powerful faith can be.
It doesn't give easy answers, but it shows how faith can bring strength and comfort, even in the toughest times.
I think that's what makes it so impactful.
It's a call to action, too, to support those who serve and work for peace.
And it reminds us that even in the midst of conflict, there's still hope.
That's a good message to end on. If you want to read these incredible stories for yourself, pick up a copy of Under His Wings.
It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope you enjoyed it.